Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the fine people of South Africa. Welcome again to the Daily French Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I'm joined today by Mr. Michael Morris. Michael, how are you? How is Cape Town?
Very well, thank you. For my part, certainly, I'm sure Cape Town's doing pretty well. It's quite a cloudy day today, coolish, which is quite pleasant, but all good, thank you.
Excellent. And Miss Sara gone. Sara, how are you?
Hi, I'm well, and it is early autumn. Very nice.
Indeed,
cool.
it is. It is. Although my room is uncomfortably warm, so I have the fan on, and I hope that the microphone's not picking up. I don't think it is. But anyway, so let's get into our first story. And I apologize to our viewers and listeners for the slightly clickbaity headline here, which is, will renaming speed up service delivery? Because I think the answer is no. But you may ask, why is such a stupid question being asked? Well, because the Minister of Cooperative Governance, Traditional Affairs, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, has announced that changing the name of the Mbizana local municipality in the Eastern Cape, which is on the Wild Coast, will help speed up service delivery. She delivered a keynote address today at the official renaming of the municipality, which was gazetted back in early March. She went on to say, the renaming of Mbizana local municipality is an important step towards ensuring that the Winnie Madikizela Mandela municipality serves communities with care and respond to their concerns timeously. Sorry, it's actually misspelled in her text of her speech and rapidly. At the heart of the renaming of the municipality is a resolve to serve communities better, bearing in mind that Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela served people selflessly and wholeheartedly. Moreover, she was a champion of the poor. Therefore, the remaining pays homage to her ideals and values. This is not the only part of the ANC that's said that renaming is a great idea. ANC's Free State branch has said in the past that municipalities should intensify their renaming processes to speed up service delivery. And there's even a claim by some officials that renaming places, in particular streets, will ensure the delivery of emergency services. I presume that's because some streets haven't got proper names. Sara, on what basis could she possibly claim that changing a municipality to be named after Winnie Mandela is going to speed up service delivery?
None whatsoever. It's actually a sign of desperation when they suddenly go on a splurge of street renaming or town renaming or district renaming, because renaming a town, a district, has absolutely nothing to do with service delivery. I mean, that's different to actually giving a street a name which it doesn't have one, writing it, printing it, painting it on the curb, and making sure that ambulances can get there fast enough. That's assuming that there are the ambulances to get there fast enough, or the police cars, or whatever else they may be. I think it's a terrible sign of sort of political decline, in fact, because I cannot believe, and I don't say I have the figures to back it up, but I cannot believe that in the trouble that South Africa is in at present, that the renaming of anything is something that occupies the minds of the good people of South Africa over and above or anywhere near an improvement on service delivery. So I think it's a conceit, it's a sign of desperation. And although Winnie had her positives for some years, she ended most of the rest of her life in a state of some ignominy, both with criminal charges regarding to theft and murder even. And I think there's been quite a lot of mention of her her name coming up in renaming events, and I don't think that's appropriate. And if they see Winnie perhaps as the model to look for at the moment, boy, the ANC is drawing from the bottom of the pile. Or she is at the top of the pile and that says terrible things about the rest of the pile.
Michael, what's your take on the issue of renaming, and also on naming something specifically after Winnie?
Indeed. I mean, it's obviously a very broad topic, but Sara has touched on some of the key points. My feeling about renaming over a long period now, since 94, has been that there are so many instances where things are not named at all, or new facilities that are developed, where it's perfectly reasonable from a kind of heritage point of view, or a point of view of making people feel that they're part of the country, to give these unnamed places names which do acknowledge a broader past. And there's certainly no question that if you look at naming of things before 1994, they tended to be skewed to a quite a narrow spectrum of our heritage. Not always, but it was certainly so. But the question of renaming is, I've always thought runs the risk of gradually introducing an element of amnesia into the public record, but also the public understanding of where we've come from. I think it's quite important to remember that there was an H.F. Verwoerd, and there was an Oswald Perot, or whatever it might be. And I'd always thought, one of the best things to do with streets or parks or whatever named after figures like that is to keep the name, but to annotate the sign, so that we, people who had no understanding of the person or the time would then actually have something to gain from that, and have a sense that this is a problematic aspect of our heritage. So yeah, just in the very broad terms, the question of naming things, it has great potential to add to the record, but also this unfortunate potential of introducing this public amnesia into basically where we've come from and why we battle with so many things as we do today. And that really now brings us to the question of well, first of all, the figure of Winnie Mandela, a decidedly conflict-laden figure, as Sara has indicated. On one hand, surely a kind of tragic reflection of the kind of grinding abuse of apartheid, but the risk of emphasizing that at the expense of everything else about it is that it's quite patronizing to, in fact, downplay her agency as a person, and that's where some of the key problems arise. She did actually behave in particular ways, was charged for terrible crimes. It's worth remembering that in the TRC, one of their kind of crisis moments was trying to get her simply to acknowledge or illustrate some kind of awareness of her role, or her awareness, her knowledge of things that were done in her name or that she actually did, and that still hasn't really been settled. It was eventually compromised out of any sort of meaningful framework, and that was a pity. The kind of great opportunity, I think, was lost there to level with the facts of that quite recent history. So the question of Winnie herself is highly problematical, to use an awful word. But quite beyond this, I mean, as you were saying, Nicholas, right at the start, the short answer is renaming things ain't going to help deliver better services. And it's quite funny. I mean, that word that you stumbled over, the incorrect word used in the speech issued beforehand on behalf of Dlamini Zuma. The word is, respond to public concerns timorously, which is exactly the opposite of really what she meant, but is possibly a more accurate reflection of the actuality. So, yeah, I mean, I think quite clearly, we've been arguing for a long time about what is needed to address service delivery and change on the ground. And it's unfortunately the opposite of so much of what Zana Dlamini Zuma's government is actually doing in terms of policy.
No, very wise words, I think. My take on this is, so I'll admit that on the issue of renaming, in theory, I'm quite sort of soft on the issue. I think that symbols and names are important. And I can see an argument for changing quite a lot of names, but in the South African context, I think that it's almost always a bad thing. And that's because the way I see it, it's used for two reasons. One is a sort of racial nationalist reason, and the other is an ANC party political reason. So the racial nationalist reason is that whenever the ANC is in some sort of trouble, it likes to rename something after someone who is very kind of different from who it was before, someone who's often more controversial. And they do this specifically to try and whip up racial antagonism. because they want Steve Hofmeyr or someone to go and chain themselves to, I don't know, Paul Kruger's statue or whatever, and make a big fuss, and then they can create racial tension. They say, look, you see, the Afrikaners don't want us to have our heritage represented. The ANC party political thing is to make sure that everything in the country reflects the ANC. It's the only part of our history that's sort of acknowledged at all in the public sphere. And I think this is a good example of that, this particular municipality, because, of course, it used to be called the Imbizana municipality, right? Which is not the world's most colonial name. So the argument about sort of making the country's naming more representative is, I think, completely false. It's making the country's names more representative of the ANC. And so the ANC gets a sort of historical and ideological hegemony through the whole of society. I don't know. Sara, what do you make of that take?
Look, I think the ANC has often been guilty of symbolism over action. In the if you fail, if everything else fails, you do something symbolic. The problem with the name changing is that it's. I agree absolutely on the historical basis, but how is this being done? How are the people of the affected city, town, area? How do they feel about it? I mean, I understand that the renaming of Port Elizabeth to Gqeberha was Nathi Mthethwa's response to one Khoisan activist. I mean, that's ludicrous, particularly given the relevance, the number of people that are affected by it, and the fact that every name change, particularly of a town, is actually quite an expensive, laborious process. I mean, if you think, I mean, the reason why I don't I tend to see the ANC as being fairly shallow and insincere on a lot of this stuff is the fact that there are quite major roads in Johannesburg named after key apartheid political figures that no one has done anything about or probably pays any attention to. There haven't been petitions, etc., etc. And I'm not saying that those roads, the names of those roads, shouldn't change. But what I'm saying is that I think there are in fact certain things that are symbolically more meaningful than others. And by and large, you don't have to resort to always renaming streets or towns to meet a political end. And it also suggests that the EFF tail is wagging the ANC dog, because the EFF largely rehabilitated Winnie after the Mandela era. And it's in a way, it's kind of symbolic of sort of the diminution of our principles or ANC principles over that time. So I'm skeptical on an issue that can be dealt with more seriously and more with more care and sympathy.
Yeah.
For me, the giveaway that a lot of these name changes are made in a kind of bad faith for strategic reasons is that back when the battle was raging over what to rename Pretoria, that issue seemed to crop up whenever a big ANC scandal had broken in the news. Suddenly, the discussion over whether Pretoria needed to be renamed to Tshwane would begin again. Michael, any concluding thoughts on this before we move on?
Indeed. I mean, I certainly agree with both of you, but your point earlier, Nicholas, that, that names are important. This is something that people like to, helps people feel part of the society and part of the country and part of the changing society. So I think naming is good. And Cape Town always, can be good, can be an effective and very positive thing. And there are a few instances in Cape Town, in fact, which I think it took quite a battle for them to succeed in introducing, but where key figures who might ordinarily have been pushed to the side or obscured have in fact been brought to the fore. And one of the most interesting ones, of course, is Philip Kosana, the young chap, PSE aligned fellow who led that march in 1960. So a portion of one of the major freeways is named after him. And Cape Town is quite clever in using, this a freeway that had quite a bland bureaucratic name, and they've given segments of it particular names which reflect a variety of aspects of history. And then the other person is Kritoa, a very, very early go-between, also a very conflicted figure in many ways, but a significant figure in the very early days of of the establishment of the Wittling station and so on. So there are instances where I think it has been successful and it makes a necessary contribution or addition to the visible record of the past. Yeah,
I think I'll take something from what our colleague Terence Corrigan said in a presentation that he gave to us last night about heritage and history, and that's one of the key things here. I think is to avoid a sense of triumphalism. Because very often that's how this plays out in the public sphere. It's seen as kind of the ANC being triumphant over its vanquished enemies of the past and over the past regime. I think that's just a short road to kind of antagonism and disaster. If you do want to change things' names, you have to do it in a very considered way, and you also have to pick figures who people really, there's a consensus that people.
That this should be celebrated, yeah.
Right, exactly. And so the picking of Winnie is very much definitely not one of those cases.
No.
But unfortunately, one of the projects of the ANC, I think, has been to remove any figures that we can all sort of agree on from the public sphere. So basically, for the majority of South Africans, we're left with Mandela, and even the EFF is trying to get rid of him as a generally accepted icon.
Indeed.
Anyway,
yeah.
Let's move on to the big story in the world, which has, of course, been a big story in the world for the past year, and that is the Wuhan Flu, the China virus, or COVID-19. Now, the WHO, that is the World Health Organization, was very slow in the initial stages of the spread of the virus to identify it as a contagious virus. They believed China's descriptions of the disease at face value. And there's a fair amount of evidence to suggest that China was either slow or didn't care much about preventing the virus from escaping. Even 2 weeks to a month after they knew that it could be transferred between human beings, the Chinese government was still claiming that it came from eating infected food. So the WHO was very slow in that initial period, but since then, they've had to do a report into where the virus started and how it came to be. And that report was, the investigators of that report were denied access to China for a very long time, until I think February of this year. So literally a year after the pandemic started, they were only allowed to go in. They were also taken on tours of propaganda museums, which the Chinese had built to celebrate the triumph of Wuhan's population over the virus and things like that. And they've now written and released their report. And the head of the WHO, who is someone I criticized very heavily at the start of this for being very friendly to China, has actually been quite critical of the Chinese government. He said of the report, he said that they're not happy with it. He said, in my discussions with the team, they expressed difficulties they encountered in accessing raw data. He called for timely and comprehensive data sharing. And he criticized the Chinese government for not doing enough to kind of be upfront with what exactly had happened. One of the theories that's been going around is that there's a possibility that the virus escaped from one of the research laboratories that exists in Wuhan. The Chinese have several virus research labs there. The Chinese government has denied this very fiercely, and in fact has used their sock puppets to claim that in fact the virus started in other places, possibly the US, and then spread to China on frozen food. This theory of it escaping from a lab, the head of the WHO said, "We are not ruling it out yet. All theories of the virus's origin are still on the table." So that was a bit of a long introduction, but Michael, what do you make of the story and how it's developing?
I mean, I think very significant on a number of levels. Obviously important for the world to have a trustworthy sense of the kind of early evolution of the virus and how China responded to it. But also, I think very important for a world body that sets itself up as, the go-to place in times of crisis, such as a pandemic, to see that that it is exercising a kind of independence here, and that is, expressing skepticism and implicitly saying, we want answers and so on. So I think, very healthy from that point of view. As you say, right at the start, Tedros Ghebreyesus was seemed to be overly willing to accept whatever China said last year. and to accord, China a kind of special treatment in a way. So I think, quite a significant development that this measure of skepticism has come into it.
Right. One of the features of that was around 2020, the Taiwanese government in an email strongly implied, they said basically that they strongly suspected that there was transmission between human beings, and the WHO ignored that suggestion.
Yeah.
Still China's official line for a while yet. Sara, what do you make of this? What do you make of the lab leak theory?
They say it's not the top theory in the pile, but there's certainly, I think it was the retired head of the CDC in America is fond of the theory, and chatting to medical people, it's not impossible. People grow viruses and all sorts of nasties all the time in labs, but the thing is, your protocols have to make sure that they don't go anywhere, and petri dishes are not left open. I think the problem, however, was that the WHO went into China to write a report to investigate the situation, weren't allowed into areas they should have been able to investigate, came back, wrote a report, and it was only when the report was written, which confirmed the sort of namby-pambiness of their original actions, that America and Europe really came down very critically. And I think this caused Tedros Ghebreyesus to sort of become more hardline, which is absolutely appropriate. And I think the interesting thing about it is I work on the basis that if the Chinese have nothing to be ashamed of or complain about, they shouldn't be banging their fists on their on their sort of communal tables. So what in fact happens is by being obstructionist and petulant, they give rise to the sense that, well, hang on a sec, maybe there actually is something there. It's very un-Western behavior. It's behavior that emanates from a non-democracy. So maybe one's reading something into it from our point of view that we shouldn't. But given the damage that the virus has done to the world, and not so much to China, I think the WHO owes it to us to investigate every possibility and eliminate what's really impossible after those investigations have been done.
Yeah.
Right. So there were actually 13 countries which issued a statement criticizing the report by the WHO that included Britain, the United States, Japan, and Australia, who of course are all geopolitical rivals of China. But one of the reasons that the lab leak theory, I think, came out of a lot of serious discussion, it wasn't just from the sort of more conspiracy-minded corners, was because China has had a record of having pretty poor safety procedures at its labs in the past, and there's been several instances where researchers have been infected with viruses they were studying, and then luckily they seem to have managed to contain it each time. But it's very possible that COVID, with its quite long incubation period, it can take 5 days for you to show symptoms. Someone spent 2 days at home from the office after getting exposed and said, I'm fine, and then went back to work, and well, the rest is history. But the thing is, we'll probably never know, because the Chinese government destroyed all evidence.
One of the concerns that sort of point to the lab theory is that usually when viruses mutate from animals to humans, they take quite a long time to get to that level of mutation required for
quick transmission between people.
For transmission, and so that does add to the sort of boiling issues around this. So I think it's been interesting, because I think given the fact that the China has come down on Hong Kong and is essentially being the big tyrannical bully and saying so in the East, their response to this has been interesting. It's not as it doesn't have a sense of they're in control of the narrative.
Right. No, I think that's very true. Yeah. Anyway, hopefully we will discover more as this goes on. I hope that one day the truth does come out about what exactly happened. Although I suspect it's going to take many years and a lot of analysis and possibly even some technological advancements before we truly get a good picture of how exactly COVID started and evolved.
And a war in the China Sea.
Yeah, no, exactly. There might be a lot of drama to come before we find out that truth. Now, I just want to close off with a story that we all were suspicious might be an April Fool's story because it's so crazy, but it doesn't appear to be. It was reported in Iowa, and it's based on a magazine article in Drum. And this is about a pastor in Limpopo who, one of the things he does with his congregation to heal them is he farts on their face. There's a picture of this in the news article if you look it up. His name is, he calls himself Christ Penelope, and he founded a church called the Sevenfold Holy Spirit Ministries. This is in Guyana in Limpopo. He gained a lot of attention on social media after he sat on a congregant's face and farted into their face. And he said that this is part of an important demonstration of God's power. He said, quote, "It started with Master Jesus when he stepped on Peter. It is the demonstration of God's power. Just like when God made Adam go into a deep sleep, it is a similar thing. God did anything with the body of Adam while he was on the ground in deep sleep. He was not feeling anything." The idea of this ritual is that it's supposed to sort of imbue with the Holy Spirit and heal you and cause mental or physical ailments to go away. He's obviously been criticized very harshly for this. But the question I have for you two is, this is not the first time we've seen a sort of weird story like this. I mean, we've only got a few minutes to talk about this, but we've seen churches where people eat grass, people drink petrol. And I guess I'll start with you, Michael. Very briefly, what's driving these sort of weird churches to pop up, do you think?
It is the oddest thing, isn't it? I mean, hot air is the word that comes to mind here.
I had holy smoke, but I think you're more on point.
Holy smoke, indeed. I remember some years ago meeting a theology academic who'd been commissioned to write a book about religious belief in America. And having done research over more than a year, he came back and was really trying to persuade his publishers that the title had to be Holy Shit. There is a sense, but perhaps, I mean, I suppose if we look in history, there've always been these moments where people cling to some sort of redemptive power that comes from the oddest source. Perhaps, does it reflect degrees of insecurity that come and go over history? A sense that, rational explanations aren't comforting or never deliver much comfort, but that, perhaps there's some inexplicable and kind of fairly easy route to attaining some kind of redemptive quality. I'm not sure. It is a puzzle, I must say.
It is something that definitely needs to be studied more. And one of the interesting things to me is I get the sense that sort of moderate middle South Africans we talk about all the time get really, really upset by these churches. And it's something the EFF in the past has capitalized on. I mean, they threatened violence basically against the petrol drinking pastor over a year or a few years ago. Sara, very briefly, in a minute or so, what are your thoughts on this issue?
I think it is partly a sign of desperation, of hopelessness. Things are bad. And I think there's a tendency that if somebody comes along who's dynamic and in their dynamism, they provide a level of comfort, people will probably more likely suspend disbelief, and to the extent one understands it, I think probably the ugliest thing about it is 9 times out of 10, other than the sheer weirdness of it, is that you'll find the pastor driving a Ferrari, which suggests the worst possible exploitation.
Yes,
right, definitely. Yeah, it's a problem, and it's also a strange phenomenon. But anyway, that is beyond the scope of what we have time for now. So thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you tomorrow. Please check out thedailyfriend.co.za and go to the ir.org.za to see what we're up to. And have a wonderful day. We'll see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.